Once upon a time, in a land far away and long ago, there lived an emperor. Of other kings or rulers it might be said, he is in his counting chamber, he is at the theater, he is with his councilmen, his ministers. But of this emperor, it was only ever said, he is in his dressing room. This emperor had such a taste for the finer things of life, particularly those things which can be worn. He spent all his day parading in front of the mirror, the large gilded mirror in his dressing room, and only came out on occasion, such as to go to the theater to show off his new look, or to walk and wave at courtiers and commoners alike, that all may bask in his reflected glory. One day in this land, two swindlers came into town. They had heard of this emperor by reputation, and they let it be known in the capital that they were weavers of the rarest variety, that their skill with satin fabrics, their skill with gold threads was unmatched. And not only that, the fabric they wove possessed magical powers. Now, when the emperor heard this, of course, he had to invite these two famous weavers into his court and commission them to create a special costume for him. And he was particularly excited when he heard what this magical power of this particularly special fabric was. The weavers said, "O king, this fabric can only be seen by those who are not a fool and those who are fit for their station. If they do not see it, they are not fit to be in your kingdom." Now the emperor, as you might suggest if he had any sense in it, as you might think if he had any sense in his head, would be quite concerned whether the people who were actually doing the ruling of his kingdom were fit for their duties, and thus he thought this was an important strategic move. He commissioned them to create a grand and glorious suit, and he set them up in a suite in the palace, and there they worked day and night, and deliveries of soft gossamer thread and silk twist were delivered day and night for this grand suit, the best of all. The weavers even put in orders for expensive white taper candles that they might sew and weave and spin into the night. Now, as this was happening, the emperor began to think, I spend all my time in my dressing room. Everybody has their little vanities. But perhaps I should have someone see as to the course of this construction. So he sent his oldest and wisest, the prime minister, to see if this man was fit for his station. Now the prime minister entered the room and saw the weavers at work with nothing. Surely the weaving was moving, the spinning was spinning, the needles were sewing, but there was no textile, there was no thread, there was no fabric. And he thought to himself, surely I cannot be unfit for my station. I've served this emperor well as his father. But being a wise man, he didn't let on to that, and merely went, "Oh, how magnificent that is! This is the finest fabric I have ever seen." And the weavers began explaining to him the embroidery and the detail in it, and he listened carefully so that he could describe it to the emperor when he went back and made his report. And the emperor heard this report and was appeased, but then thought, this is the wisest man in my kingdom, besides me. I should send in a courtier, not quite as wise, the Lord Chamberlain's second nephew I hired because he was the Lord Chamberlain's second nephew. He can go and see and tell me about this fabric, and if he can't see it, I have more to work with. Well, the courtier, although he was a fool, was not enough of a fool to admit when he could not see the fabric either. And he too spoke to the emperor about this great and beautiful fabric, the details, the brocade, the way that it reflected the light. And he also spoke to him about the cut of the jacket and the flow of the cloak, for the weavers had given him specific, detailed descriptions of everything that they were showing to him. And then the emperor thought, he must not be as much a fool as I thought if he can give such an accurate portrayal of this magic cloth. And so the emperor, in his pride and vanity, declared that there be a great procession at the next national kingdom holiday, that he would wear his new suit. And when the weavers heard this, they came before the king and they said, "O king, we are without words for this compliment you have bestowed upon us, but we do require a touch more commission to get it done in time." And so more bags of gold were given to the weavers to finish this in time before the grand procession. And all those bags of gold, along with the previous ones, and the silk twist, and the golden thread that had been given to these swindlers, went into their suitcases, along with all the other clothes that had never come out, for they kept their bags packed at all times. But they worked, and they worked, and they worked, and no one could doubt their industry, for every night that whole wing of the palace was ablaze with the light that was emanating from their room as all the candles were lit, and they were working away to get this, the king's great suit, finished in time for the procession. And that day dawned, bright and clear, and the emperor strode into his dressing room and waited. And the swindlers came bustling in with all the courtiers, and they brought out the bags of the robes, and they opened them, and they hung up the ivory hangers, the cloaks, and they said, "O king, here are your pantaloons, and here is not this shirt fine, and look, the brocade on this vest is unparalleled anywhere in the world." And the courtiers and the emperor looked, and they touched, and they felt, and they admired nothing and everything, for they did not know the difference between the two. And so the swindlers, along with the courtiers, dressed the emperor in his glory, with the coat streaming off the back of his shoulders, and 2 wardrobe chamberlains went bent down to pick up the end and march along. Those 2 chamberlains did steal a glance at each other, but were too worried to do anything further, since each thought the other had seen it. But they marched forward with solemn dignity, following the emperor. And thus the processional began. And all the adults in the crowd, courtiers, nobles, merchants, butlers, bakers, butchers, had heard the descriptions of these fabulous clothes, and they said, "Magnificent! How the light reflects off of it! Surely this is the finest clothing we have seen our emperor in." Until, in the midst of all this praise and clamor, a little boy about 5 years old pulled on his mother's sleeve and said, "Mother, the emperor's not wearing any clothes." And there was a silence around him. And that silence grew to a whisper, and the whisper grew to a clamor. For what 5-year-old can be thought a fool? And what child is unfit for his station? And the whispers grew to a clamor, and the clamor grew to mutters, and the emperor, walking along, heard the mutters, but what could he do? He continued the processional, and the fanfare continued all the way down the street. And those 2 wardrobe chamberlains stood behind, as dignified as ever, and marched along. And that, my friends, is the story of the emperor's new clothes. Mr.